This is video history from the J. Bay Jacobs Library for the History of Obstetrics and Gynecology in America. And with us today, Dr. Keith Russell, past president of the college. And Keith, we particularly wanted to talk with you about an innovation that you brought to the college, that is CREOG, the Council on Resident Education in Obstetrics and Gynecology. But if I could, Keith, let me ask you first to tell us a little bit about your involvement with the college. When did you become a fellow, and what are some of the important things in your mind that you've done as a real contributor to the college?
Well, I like to be thought of as a contributor. When I think about it, I think it was one of the great experiences of my life to have gotten involved with the college. I was a founding fellow when it was first being developed, called the American Academy. My major first involvement came when the college held its one and only annual clinical meeting in Los Angeles, and I was named local arrangements chairman and program chairman. Since at that time it was combined.
What year was that?
I have to think back, but it was the late 50s, early 60s. I'd have to look in my book to recall. Those years float by.
By that time, though, the academy had become the college.
Right. And the college was going through its process of updating its requirements, upgrading to make it equivalent of needing certification of the American Board to become a fellow of the college. There were some grandfathers in who, rightfully so, had helped establish the academy. And but then following that, as the college became more prominent, more active, really the voice of obstetrics and gynecology in America, my other involvement then came subsequently on a number of committees, public relations, program, local arrangements, and then eventually section chairman for the state of California, district chairman of District 8, then, which was the whole civic zip area. Second vice president, first vice president, during which term the incumbent president, Dr. Willis Brown, passed away, and I was made, by reason of office, became president for his remaining term, which was about 7 months.
What year was that?
That was 69.
1969, you were president for the first time.
President for the first time. Then I had the good fortune to be elected on my own in 73, 74 through the regular nominating process by the committee and according to the Constitution. So I had the unique position, through no fault of mine, of just having been in the right place at the right time, of being president of the college twice.
And ultimately, if I remember, president of the International Federation as well.
Yes, that came about because of interest in what I perceive as some need for our college to have some international relation. It does not mean that we would take over the specialty around the world, but there was a need. I was stimulated in that interest by Dr. Howard Taylor and others, although we had a significant number of fellows who thought that that was not a proper activity for the college, and we still pursue those debates. But I became interested in it, was named a delegate, and I was actually appointed to that position by Dr. Sprague Gardner. When the vacancy came up, I followed Alan Barnes as the executive board representative on FIGO from the United States, and was appointed by Sprague Gardner, and then went through the chairs and became president of the International Federation.
What years were you president?
I was president I would say 1982 to 1979 to 1982, it seemed about right.
What we really wanted to hark back to today was something that you haven't said, but what was certainly one of your really major contributions both to the college and to the specialty, and that was the founding of the CREOG, the Council on Resident Education, dating back in the late 1960s. It's something I think all of us would agree was a very significant move in improving graduate medical education in our specialty to its present point. Where did the idea come from for CREOG?
Well, it is a unique development, Warren, because I think we're the only specialty that has such an organization. We were fortunate, it seems to me, as I look back at the college, we were fortunate in having far forward-looking men. And the original idea of a council on resident education came from a deceased president, Dr. Frank Locke. At that time, the college had a committee on resident education, although the college really had no involvement. They were not members of the American Board. They were not members of the Residency Review Committee by appointment in those days. But it did have a council or committee on resident education. The chairman of that committee was R. Gordon Douglas. And Frank Locke gave him the charge to say we ought to try to coordinate and get the college more involved in resident education, because all the fellows of the college are going to have been residents, and we should be looking at that. And also we had a committee on undergraduate education, separate from the committee on resident education. And Frank gave them the charge to develop something, and there was no real format. It came about by discussion and repeated meetings with representatives from the board, from the AMA Council on Medical Education, from American Fertility Society in the beginning, and as association professors, APGO became formed. And it sort of grew, but it took the gestational process was neither rapid nor easy, because the AMA Council on Medical Education had a strong feeling that we may be getting into a field that they should be supervising, they should be overlooking, because they supported the Residency Review Committee financially, and that was their bag. And so we had to go through that. So it took 2 years of getting the final proposal to the executive committee of the college, and it took another 2 years before the enabling document was developed. That was 63 to 65, 65 to 67. It was in April of 67 that the enabling document was developed, which called for a council on resident education to be composed of 6 members from the American College, 1 member each from the American College of Surgeons, the American Gynecological Society, American Association, APGO, and I guess SGI. The AMA was offered a position, but withdrew, so that we settled on, or it was settled on the 12 individuals, all of whom must be fellows of the college, even though they represented other organizations, but 6 appointed by the college, the other 6 appointed by their individual organizations. This was a sticking point for many years in the development, because there were those in the other organizations who were not yet ready to accept the role of the college in this area. I mean, members of the American Board, members of the American Gynecological Society. And I don't say that with any rancor, it's just a way of thinking. Those were the preeminent societies. And here was this upstart young college coming along, made up of a bunch of people who were primarily in practice, and they didn't understand education. At least that was some of the thinking. So it was trying to have equal representation. But forces more far-sighted, in my opinion, such as Duncan Reed, Howard Taylor, others said no, the college must be, they're paying the bill. It was agreed that the college would support financially with a budget of $50,000 annually, which was a considerable sum to support the activities of the council. And then it was appointed. I was appointed to the first council by Duncan Reed, as a matter of fact, as a representative of the college.
Now, it's April 1967, and the college executive board has approved CREOC. What was it supposed to do? What were the functions that were set forth?
Well, and this had been addressed in the development phases, exactly what it should do. First, it was to be a forum for program directors. The program directors really had no voice in any of the things that were regulating their activities. The Residency Review Committee was an accrediting body, but they did not provide the curriculum, suggested routines of teaching, how to deal with residents, and so forth. They approved you or accredited you But they did not offer to the program directors a voice or a discussion forum or anything like that. So the first step was to provide something for program directors, realizing that at least 2/3 of the programs in the United States are community hospital programs and not university programs. University programs have their organization of chairmen and of AAMC and so forth that bring them together. But the community hospital program directors did not have that. So it was felt that this would be an opportunity. This was to be a voluntary, non-regulatory, inter-organizational group that was available to support residency training on a voluntary basis operations. There were four major goals or objectives. One was to provide a forum for program directors, to provide a base for them to communicate with.
So it was a place to get together, really, or
it was a
exchange
place
information.
to share information, experiences, and concerns. The second goal was to develop an in-training examination to be given annually on a voluntary basis, so residents and programs could evaluate how they were doing, how their cognitive knowledge was being developed by the residents, and if it was being properly. So the second thing was an in-training exam. The third was to provide a consultation service for programs that might request us for advice. Program feeling, well, we're not teaching, let's say, genetics, although genetics was not big in our operation then, but would like to have more information. How do you approach this problem, that problem?
Who was going to do the consultation then?
We were going to, the Committee on Consultations would ask volunteers, people who had been in residency review committee evaluations or who had been known as good teachers, organizers, and they would select those. They did not necessarily have to be members of CREOG, the council. They were just asked to serve, and because CREOG had great appeal, I think, and had gained respect, why we had people that we would like to have that would go out and look at a program and send back, not to the residency review committee. It was not to be regulatory or accredited. Send back to the program director and say, well, this is what we think could be improved. This you need to look at this. You've got too many foreign medical graduates. See if you can't get more U.S. as an example. Things of this nature. And then the fourth objective was to develop educational packages. All four of those objectives that were originally developed are still the main force of the real.
Here we are 17 years later, and we think all of us can think back and see that those things have happened. And
we've accomplished it. My particular role was I was the first chairman of the in-training examination committee. And we were starting from scratch. The orthopedics especially had an exam, and also the neurosurgeons. But it was different than what we conceived. The interesting thing from a historical standpoint, that at the very time we were setting up an in-training examination, we learned that the American board had in fact appointed a right committee, which was Resident In-Training Examination Committee, because the board felt that they were going to do that. And the great, again, I mentioned foresight because an understanding of J. Robert Wilson, who was the first chairman of CREOG, and he was on the board, and he wrote to the board and says, this is not a proper role for the board, this is a proper role for CREOG. The board, if the board gives it, it's going to be interpreted as something that if you pass that and do well in it, you should pass your boards. And then if he doesn't pass his boards, the candidate's going to say, well, gee, I took your examination and I did well, and now you tell me, so there must be some political things here. So
had to be a conflict of interest.
There had to be a conflict of interest, and Clyde Randall, who was at that time secretary of the board and was the main spokesman, was the one who implemented the withdrawal of the board from that activity, and they dissolved their committee, and it went totally in the hands of CREOG. And Dr. Michael Newton, who was then director of the college, was by organization was the secretary of CREOG, and he had experience on the National Board of Medical Examiners Committee in developing questions, and he and I went to Philadelphia. We selected a national board to get away from the executive or the testing service, educational testing service that the board used for their exam. We wanted to have a different body doing it, and we went to the National Board, and they became the ones who put it together with our supervision. Then we appointed an examination committee. We put on a member from a community hospital. We put on people who were not directly involved in resident training, but in education and so on. And we wrote the first examination, and I can tell you that it was like babes in the woods, but we put it together. And not our program in the United States at that time accepted it. The southern schools, for their own reasons, said, no, we conduct our own exam. We're not going to pay $25 for this. We don't need it. We know now that they have changed their mind, and we have information that every program in the United States now utilizes the in-training examination. And I've forgotten over 4,000, I guess, took it this past year. It's entirely voluntary.
Keith, you've summarized something about the CITROG exam, which I think today most observers would say has certainly been at least the most recognized activity that CREOG's undertaken since its inception. With all the other activities considered, what influence do you think CREOG has had on the education of young physicians and indeed on our specialty?
Well, I think CREOG has gained its respect through its activities. It's stayed pretty well out of the political arena. It has kept doing, which many organizations don't do. It sounds simple, but it's kept doing what it does best. It hasn't tried to be all things to all people. It has fulfilled its role as a forum for program directors. Now, as you know, at one time there was a movement to form an association of program directors. Most of us, or many of us, felt that CREOG answered that need, but it was not formally organized. We were afraid that you get a formal organization of any group, they got to be active, they got to be doing something, and we thought that would not have a beneficial effect on CREOG, and CREOG was doing that sort of thing. So I think that that activity, the program directors meeting that's held once a year now, presently in conjunction with the APGO, formerly was always part of the ACM, but it led to problems because of overlapping activities. Those programs bring the program director up to date on stuff he needs to know. Report from the American Board, report from the Residence Review Committee, reports from the educational activities, and there are exhibits and so on. CREOG has not been stationary when I say that it's done what it's supposed to. It has expanded now, and for instance, in education, they're beginning to publish monographs on basic science subjects, which tend to get neglected in residency training. Now they're expanding that and fleshing it out so that there will be more basic science available as cognitive knowledge for the resident. Those kinds of activities gradually get expanded. The consultation service has survived. I don't think that it's been overwhelmingly utilized, but it's since there have been stricter requirements for residency training developed in July '83, the consultation service is being used more because many programs are being looked at harder by the Residency Review Committee.
I really like your point that CREOG set its goals and set forth to do them and did them well, and that's a way that an organization really functions best. Let me, Keith, because I think everyone, when they think of CREOG, however it came about over a fairly slow gestation period, thinks of you as being the founder of the things that have happened since those days in the mid-1960s. What makes you most proud about CREOG?
Well, it's a good question. I guess just the fact that it has been, quote, successful makes me most proud. I think that from a personal standpoint, the thing that I have the greatest satisfaction with is that we put on a a good in-training examination. We developed it, and there were many people who thought that this was never going to go anyplace. It was too big a job. It could not be handled properly. It would not do what it was supposed to do. And the fact that it has been so superbly successful, due to many people long after I was involved in it, the dedication of these people is, I think, the thing that I would be most proud of personally. It's always nice to be thought of as the founder of CREOG, but I was just one small cog in the wheel. But since I seem to have been around longer than many of them, I get the credit for it.
Dr. Keith Russell, the only individual to have twice been president of the college, the man who indeed everyone certainly associates with the founding of CREOG, and I think it's fair to say a senior statesman in the college.
Thank you, Warren. It's been a pleasure to be with you.